What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Bria Riptide Rogue from the upcoming set Bloomburrow. Bria is a 3/3 otter rogue for 2 and a red and blue that has prowess, gives other creatures you control prowess, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. When I saw the other creatures gain prowess and the unblockable ability on non-creature spellcasts, I thought of one theme immediately: infect. Bria does pretty much everything that an infect deck wants to do. She pumps up our infect creatures, allowing them to give opponents more poison counters on hit, while also making them unblockable, allowing us to make sure we consistently hit our opponents for maximum poison. While we don't have access to two of the best colors for infect, that being green and black, we can still make do with red and blue, and the numerous artifact creatures that have the ability. Not to mention proliferate, which blue is one of the best colors for, which will allow any single poison counter we get onto an opponent to become a ticking time bomb, even without any infect creatures out. This combination of proliferate spells and infect creatures with Bria's abilities makes for a potentially devastating poison deck that can annihilate our opponents. With that, let's get to the card highlights. The first thing we'll need for this deck is creatures with infect. Since we don't have access to green or black, our options are going to be rather limited, but there are enough to make it work. We do have access to one of the best ones, however, in Blighted Agent, which comes with unblockability built into it, meaning we can use Bria's ability on another creature if our non-creature spells are limited. Viral Drake is also a great one, as it contains an activated ability to proliferate, which will very likely come in handy in situations where it can't attack. Fallen Ferromancer is a great way to get an initial poison counter on an opponent if attacking is not a feasible option, as activating its ability and targeting an opponent will cause them to get a poison due to Infect's non-specific damage clause. There are also a number of good artifact creatures that have Infect, and even proliferate. Phyrexian Juggernaut is a massive creature that can easily take an opponent out in as few as 2 attacks by itself. Core Prowler is a nice one that also has a built-in proliferate trigger when it dies, meaning losing it still gets us value. Corpse Cur is great because it can bring back one of our infect creatures from the graveyard when it enters the battlefield. This will be extremely useful as our infect creatures are likely to be killed off rather consistently by our opponents. Finally, there are a few good utility or non-creature permanents that can give us an infect ability. Plague Mirror is nice because it can either be used to attack and infect our opponents, or be used to ramp out our other spells that we want to cast. Corrupted Conscience not only steals one of our opponent's creatures, but also gives it infect, potentially allowing us to take a massive attacker from an opponent and use it against them to even greater effect. Finally, Grafted Exoskeleton is a great option to give Bria herself infect. Since she has prowess and can target herself with the unblockability, this can be a great way to take out an opponent, as she will be, at minimum, a 5/5 infector with the exoskeleton equipped. After infect cards, we'll need some proliferate effects to not only trigger prowess, but also allow us to finish opponents in cases where we can no longer attack them effectively. Contentious Plan and Experimental Augury are both great options, as they not only proliferate, but also let you draw a card, all for 2 mana. Volt Charge can be useful in situations where an opponent may have a small but deadly or frustrating creature on the battlefield, while also allowing us to proliferate poison counters in a 2-for-1 sort of fashion. Radstorm is a new card from the upcoming Fallout set that can be devastating in a deck like this. Since a lot of the spells will be cast and will be low costed, we could potentially have turns where we get a decent storm count, allowing us to proliferate our opponent's poison counters a large amount in a single turn. Not to mention, it's an instant, so it will trigger both prowess and Bria's ability, adding to the pressure on our opponents even more that turn. Serum Snare is a conditional proliferate, but can be useful in situations where we need to eke out a single poison counter or 2 to finish an opponent off. Even targeting something like a Soul Ring or other mana rock in these situations can be a useful strategy if it gets us our last poison counter on someone. One thing I love about poison counters are the conditional cards that we now have access to, and specifically, counter spells. Bring the Ending and Corrupted Resolve are cards that are either not so good or completely unusable outside of decks that cannot poison our opponents. However, in a dedicated poison deck like this one, these so-so counter spells become much more useful, as they will be 2 mana counters with no downside or specific condition that will be as situational as others of this type usually are. Now that we have infect creatures and proliferate spells, how about spells that buff our creatures somehow? This will not only be useful to trigger prowess and unblockable, but also just simply allow our creatures to hit that much harder. Assault Strobe and Temur Battle Rage are great examples that will give a creature double strike, allowing us to double the poison counters given to an opponent from our unblockable infect creatures. Savage Beating is also phenomenal, as it could give all of our creatures double strike, or give us an additional combat phase, or both. The additional combat phase is especially nice, since the creatures targeted with Bria's unblockable ability will still be unblockable in the second combat, potentially allowing us to alpha strike an opponent with only 1 or 2 creatures alone. Free from Flesh and Raise the Effigy are great examples to give one of our infect creatures +2/+2, which alongside the prowess trigger and Bria's unblockable ability, will make an infect creature have +3/+3 and unblockable, allowing us to give an opponent a large number of poison counters from just one spell. Mercadia's Downfall is a personal favorite of mine, as most players run a large number of non-basic lands, which makes this card pretty close to a Triumph of the Hordes type of effect in this deck. Another important thing about all of these spells is that they're all instants. This means that they can be cast after blockers are declared, allowing us to take out an unsuspecting opponent who chose not to block. Finally, there are a number of good utility cards that work well for this deck. Burst of Speed is great, not only because it triggers Bria, but also because it can give all of our creatures haste. Since some of the infect creatures are lower in cost, this can allow us to play a few in a single turn, give them all haste and trigger prowess, and attack an opponent for a substantial amount of poison counters. Pass in Flames is great to allow us to recast our spells, and since a lot of them are on the cheaper end, this could give us quite a few prowess triggers without needing to burn our entire hand in the process. Isochron Scepter is great because it will allow us to recast the same useful spell over and over again, whether it be something like Burst of Speed or Free from Flesh. The important thing to note is that Isochron Scepter also specifically states that the copied card is cast, meaning it will still trigger prowess and Bria's ability, which is exactly what we want out of the card. Here is an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Here you can see some additional infect creatures that were not specifically called out, giving us a total of 15 infect sources that we can work with. Additionally, we have a few more spells that can be used to pump or buff our creatures, as well as some additional proliferate sources. Finally, we have some removal and card draw packages that work very well in here, since they are all non-creature spells that will trigger Bria's abilities. This deck has the potential to be very powerful. Infect creatures are always dangerous in their own right, but being able to easily pump their power while also simultaneously giving them unblockable is such a powerful combination that I suspect you will be able to take out opponents very quickly and consistently with this deck. The fact that it utilizes infect, however, is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Players losing from having 10 poison counters is such a powerful rule in Commander that most people who see any sort of infect or poison related ability will immediately be scared and will likely target the person playing them. In a pot of 4 people, if one starts playing infect creatures, there's a very high likelihood that the other 3 players will focus all of their attention on that player. Playing this deck is likely to be akin to painting a bullseye on your forehead, so it's important to keep that in mind if you want to actually build this deck. That being said, this deck is likely going to be deadly enough to be able to handle multiple opponents targeting you, so if that's something you are okay with and love the idea of poisoning players out, I highly recommend giving this build a try. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Bria Riptide Rogue. The full deck list outlined in this video can be found at the Architect link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.